This presentation is part of a series on the implementation of the new liability management framework introduced by the Government of Alberta in July of 2020. We will focus on the changes to the transfer process as outlined in Directive 88. This presentation will touch briefly on the new liability management framework, discuss changes to licensee eligibility under Directive 67, and cover the new requirements pertaining to license transfers in Directive 88. When the Government of Alberta introduced the new liability management framework, the AER was directed to implement the new liability management programs, which encompasses the 5 components shown. As highlighted by the red box on the slide, this presentation discusses how the holistic assessment, supported by the Licensee Capability Assessment, the LCA, is applied in license transfer applications under Directive 88. In response to the government's policy direction, the AER delivered regulatory changes on December 1st, 2021, which included the release of Directive 88. Directive 88 introduces the holistic assessment of the licensee across the energy development lifecycle, which includes a multi-factor approach to assess licensees. To align with the new liability management framework, the new directive also addresses changes to our current transfer application processes as we move away from the LMR, the liability management rating, to consider the holistic assessment of licensees and the risk presented. Directive 88 is supported by Manual 23, which provides further details on the holistic licensee assessment and the LCA, and how the holistic assessment will be used for regulatory decisions for transfers. It is also important to note that the directive is being built in phases and will continue to evolve with future releases as we fully implement the Liability Management Framework, the LMF, and replace the Licensee Liability Rating Program. Before diving into the transfer process, it is prudent to revisit the licensee eligibility requirements as outlined in Directive 67 and that were updated in April of 2021. Acquiring and holding licenses in Alberta is a privilege, not a right. Directive 67 sets out the AER's specific requirements for obtaining and maintaining eligibility to hold energy licenses and approvals, and increases the focus on maintaining eligibility throughout the energy development lifecycle. Directive 67 requires additional information, including financial information, to be provided annually and at the time of application. This data feeds into the financial health factor to assess a licensee's level of financial distress in the LCA. The new framework increases the scrutiny on licensees throughout the energy lifecycle, including at the time of transfers and the request for refund of held security. The expanded list of unreasonable risk factors that the AER may consider is outlined in Section 4.5 of Directive 67. The updated requirements in the directive allow the AER to limit eligibility when the licensee poses unreasonable risk, regardless if a material change has occurred. This is a more proactive approach in alignment with the policy direction. Requirements to transfer AER licensed wells, facilities, and pipelines are contained in the Oil and Gas Conservation Act and the Pipeline Act, and are further defined in the Oil and Gas Conservation Rules and Pipeline Rules. Purchase and sale agreements of AER licensed wells, facilities, and pipelines do not result in the transfer of the licenses. The current licensee remains responsible for complying with all regulatory requirements for licenses involved in a transfer until the transfer is approved by the AER. The licensee receiving the licenses will become the new licensee of record for the transferred licenses upon the approval of the application. The new liability management framework enables a more holistic approach to license transfer applications to assess whether the companies can meet their regulatory and liability obligations. This slide provides an overview of the changes to license transfers. The post-transfer assessment moves away from the LLR rating program provided in Directive 6, which compares a licensee's deemed assets versus its deemed liabilities. Previously, if the transaction resulted in more liabilities than assets, that is, the LMR was below 1, a security deposit was required to offset the higher liabilities. We know the LMR is not an accurate measure of whether a company will be able to address its regulatory and liability obligations. This approach has been largely reactive and not focused on the full life cycle of energy development. Under Directive 88, license transfer applications now trigger a holistic assessment of the licensee's capabilities and performance. Closure activity must now be reported as part of the transfer process. Closure activity and spend can only be submitted by the licensee of record, and reporting is required before the licenses are transferred to a new party. Directive 88 now enables the transfer of REC certified and REC exempt licenses to ensure responsible parties maintain custody of these sites. A final highlight on the slide is the holistic licensee assessment, which now considers more than 40 different factors, including the unreasonable risk factors as described in Directive 67, the LCA, and any other factor the AER considers appropriate in the circumstance. The holistic assessment is a shift from a more prescriptive approach under LMR to a risk and performance-based assessment under Directive 88. At a high level, this is the process for license transfer applications from submission of the application through to decision. The application is submitted via the Digital Data Submission (DDS) system. The application is posted on the public notice of application and is checked for completeness. If complete, a holistic licensee assessment is conducted. If the licensee or application does not require additional scrutiny, the application will follow the routine review path for decision. Should the holistic assessment indicate further scrutiny is warranted, the application will follow the non-routine review path for decision. A decision is made and provided to both parties. Applicants can request to withdraw their application at any time without prejudice. Both parties must submit declaration statements in DDS regarding the application. The parties to the application could be two active companies or an active company with a receiver or trustee. A regulator-directed transfer must be initiated in instances where the licenses are held by an insolvent company and/or under the care of the Orphan Well Association. In order to register and initiate this type of transfer, the licensee must contact the Directive 88 team for process instructions, including an RDT application form. In an RTD application, applicants seeking to acquire licenses provide acknowledgement that they have met requirements for transfer and require a corporate officer to sign off on the request to transfer the license to their company. Once the AER receives an application for an RDT, we will register the transfer application request on behalf of both parties. The application will trigger a holistic assessment and will be reviewed in accordance with Directive 88. RDT applications are considered non-routine. As mentioned, Directive 88 enables the transfer of reclamation certified and reclamation exempt licenses. These transfers were previously not allowed to prevent companies shedding liabilities to shell companies as a means of avoiding responsibility for the sites. This was too restrictive. It did not allow the AER the necessary discretion to prevent, in limited circumstances, transfers from occurring that placed other tenants of the liability management program at risk. Enabling the transfer of REC exempt and REC cert licenses allows these sites to be transferred to a responsible party when warranted. Please note, the AER will not be revisiting previous application decisions. When we see these licenses included in an application, the AER may request additional information to understand the context of the transaction. Applying the holistic assessment, including the LCA, and understanding the context of the transaction will enable the AER to selectively apply discretion to permit the transfer of these license types. Examples of discretionary situations may include corporate cleanouts, where a seller may be planning to leave Alberta, or a white map sale of assets where the seller is divesting itself of a specific area of operation, or any other unique circumstance that may adversely affect the regulatory regime. We encourage companies to contact the AER for a pre-application meeting to discuss their situation. Another change is that closure activity reporting is now a requirement in the license transfer process. Closure activity and spend can only be submitted by the licensee of record, and reporting is required before the licenses are transferred to a new party. Once the transfer is complete, the previous licensee will not be able to submit and receive credit toward their closure spend target for the transferred licenses. Closure credit and spend is tagged to the licensee that completed and reported the work. Closure work conducted prior to a license transfer will not contribute to the purchaser's closure parameter results or spend total. Spend targets are set annually and will not be adjusted during the calendar year. See Directive 88, Section 4. If a licensee has insufficient inventory to close at the end of the year to meet their target, example due to a large transfer, that will be considered when looking at compliance. Questions about closure targets can be directed to inventory reduction at aer.ca. Upon submission, the application is posted on the Public Notice of Application, or PNOA, website. The notice will indicate a deadline for filing a statement of concern. If someone believes that they will be directly or adversely affected by the application, they have a right to be heard by the AER. If an SOC is filed, the AER will consider the concern while we decide to approve or reject the company's application and extend the timeline for application decision. More on the PNOA and statements of concern processes are available on our website. Companies can check on the status of a license transfer application in the Integrated Application Registry. Manual 23 has a table that clarifies the IAR codes you will see and defines how these relate to where a transfer is during its review process. After an application is submitted, it's checked for completeness. There are a few situations that would cause a transfer to be considered incomplete early in the review. Site-specific liability assessments, or SSLAs, are not updated prior to a transfer. Licenses are set to auto-cancel within the review timeline. Or there's incomplete working interest participant information, which is the most common reason transfer applications are closed early. The AER requires the full details of working interest participants, WIPs, for a well or a facility license to allow the identification of possible parties of the license. The AER reviews listed WIPs in a transfer by name and not BA code, as not all WIPs have a BA code, but they do need a full name to be correctly identified. Once closed, the applicant can resubmit a new application with corrections. Licensees are required to update WIP information through OneStop using the bulk upload functionality. If application fails the completeness test, it will be closed and both parties will be notified. Once an application is verified as complete, a holistic licensee assessment of both parties are conducted. The holistic assessment is rigorous and is a substantive departure from the narrow LMR assessment. It may look at over 40 parameters as outlined in Directive 88. It is likely that some applicants may have a favorable LMR, but an LCA profile which requires a more in-depth assessment prior to a decision. The amount of security required as a result of the transfer application will consider the results of the holistic assessment. Security deposits may be requested from either or both the transferor and the transferee as a condition of approval to address potential risk posed by either licensee should the transfer be approved. Routine or baseline applications are those that require no further scrutiny as a result of their holistic assessment. These applications are processed within 45 days of submission to the AER. It is important to note that the applications that are considered routine or baseline are not automatically approved without any review. These applications may still require some oversight, as there may be components in the application that require validation or additional information provided from the applicant. Applications that require further scrutiny will follow the non-routine path with a 60 business day decision timeline. The specific factors that trigger further scrutiny, along with additional information requested for the applicant, is used to determine the capability of the licensee to meet its current and post-transfer regulatory and liability obligations. Narrowing our focus on areas that may demonstrate weaker performance allows the AER to triage risks that the transfer may pose for the licensee and determine appropriate mitigations to address the risk. This slide lists some examples of the factors that may trigger further scrutiny. Please refer to Manual 23, Section 4.2 for more examples. Once risks have been identified, the AER has a suite of regulatory tools to mitigate the risk. Examples of these include more regulatory oversight, additional reporting from the licensee, or security deposits as a condition of approval. The risk posed by the transfer will support the decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. When asked to submit information in support of a transfer, the AER will provide a deadline. Manual 23 provides examples of the kind of information we may need to factor into our review. Should the company fail to respond by the deadline date for the information request, the application may be closed as incomplete based on the unknown information. As we review the transaction, the AER is seeking to understand how the transfer of licenses impacts each party. The statutory decision maker considers the analysis and recommendations of the reviewing analyst when making a decision on the application. Decisions regarding applications are conveyed to both parties of the application. Decisions may be approved with condition, denied, closed, or withdrawn. If the application is approved, a disposition of approval letter is sent to both applicants. Should an application be approved with conditions, the transfer approval conditions will be provided by letter to the applicants. Security deposit requirements as a condition of transfer are provided in the transfer condition letter along with a deadline for payment. Further examples of transfer approval conditions are provided in Manual 23. The applicant must provide signed consent to transfer conditions and submit security, if applicable, before the application will advance for approval. The license transfer application is complete when the system validation is completed and the approval letter is issued. Should the AER conclude that the application poses an unreasonable risk to public safety, the environment, or the orphan fund, the transfer is denied. The application may be closed as incomplete or withdrawn by written request at any time during an open application. Once the AER issues a decision, it is final. There is no undo button to unwind the transfer application post-decision. A new transfer application would need to be submitted with a new decision issued. To recap the timelines for a license transfer application, we make every effort to process transfer applications within our estimated times. However, in some cases, it might require longer to review because of the complexity determined through the holistic assessment and other factors beyond our control, such as concerns filed by an impacted party through the SOC process. The AER may consider a request to expedite an application in extenuating circumstances based on a risk assessment of the transfer-related activity. Requests to expedite should identify the reason for the application decision to be expedited. For example, an environmental or public safety risk that requires the transfer of the licenses to be expedited. Deadlines and contractual agreements are not considered an environmental or public safety risk and are not likely to be granted. Parties are encouraged to consider the application timelines as they draft their agreements. Under the Responsible Energy Development Act, REDA, an eligible person may file a request for a regulatory appeal on an appealable decision. These must be submitted in a form and manner and within the timeframe required by the AER. Filing requirements and forms are found on the AER's website. We have identified 5 ways for licensees to obtain additional clarity on our processes. 1. A pre-application meeting may be requested by emailing one of the 3 inboxes listed here in advance of an application filing. We will require licensees to provide an agenda in advance of the meeting to assess the topics and research any issues if required. Pre-application meetings will discuss process and will not offer predetermination of a decision. When filing an application, licensees can provide a letter detailing the concerns they have with their LCA results along with all supporting documents. We will investigate these concerns as part of the application review process and determine whether action is required. After receiving an application decision, licensees may file a regulatory appeal under Part 3 of the AER Rules of Practice. However, during the appeal time period of 30 days, the AER cannot provide any information on the decision under appeal. Licensees are reminded of this avenue on any application. And the liability management inbox is where questions should be directed outside of any of the above situations. This mailbox is monitored throughout the day. Each email is triaged and sent to the applicable teams: LCA, transfers, eligibility, security, etc. We strive to reply within 5 business days. However, this time may be extended due to the volume of inquiries we have received and the complexity of the question. The AER also provided a series of information sessions in order to inform licensees of the new requirements and processes under the new liability management framework and the holistic licensee assessment. For further information, please visit aer.ca to view the directive and manual, or for more information and any of the programs introduced by Directive 88. Thank you for your interest in the new liability management framework and the impact on transfer applications. Please check back frequently to the AER website for new developments.